All right, continuing on with Chapter 1, and we're going to move now to talking about Google. Founders Larry Page and Sergey Brin had to find a way to monetize their search results. And what they did, they actually started with a more traditional advertising model using CPM, using cost per thousand. We talked about that briefly in the last video. But then what happened, Google developed a modified second price auction system. And the way that this worked was that, it was like any other auction where people bid and the highest bidder would win. But what would happen is that the highest bidder would not pay the price that he or she actually bid. They would pay the price of what the second place bidder had offered, plus a penny on top of that. So what that did is that it made bidders feel a little better about the cost that they were paying for advertising, because they knew that they were paying the same rate that at least somebody else was willing to pay, except just a penny more. So this eliminated buyer's remorse in many cases. Then, instead of charging on a CPM model, after all this, it then transformed and adopted a model of charging an advertiser only when someone clicked on an ad. This is called CPC, cost per click. And what this did is that instead of offering advertisers opportunities for audiences, it had a better chance of showing results as people, based on clicks, were actually interacting with a particular advertisement. In 2007, the growth trajectory, of the digital era veered into a new direction because of two different innovations. The first one was the iPhone. This made the internet much more mobile. So you could look up things online and interact with it anywhere you were. It increased opportunity for seeing all sorts of content, including advertising. The other thing was programmatic buying and selling of digital ad inventory. So advertisers are now going to know in advance exactly whom they are presenting to and on exactly which site it would appear, the ad that is, and at what time that particular ad would appear. And the ability to address specific individuals rather than broad audiences created the rapid growth of programmatic trading that has irrevocably changed media buying and selling practices. There's very little guesswork now in terms of what companies like Google and other digital companies are now offering, because we're not talking about estimates, we're not talking about potentials, we're talking about hard data numbers that we can actually make some pretty decent comparisons to, at least in the scope of that actual instance in that actual company that you're doing your advertising with. Let's talk about the aggregation theory. Ben Thompson in the Strategery newsletter talks about the internet being made the ability for distribution of digital goods to be free, neutralizing the advantage that pre-internet distributors leveraged to integrate with suppliers. So the cost of being able to do all these things has pretty much been made zero because of the infrastructure that is now available. The internet has also made transaction costs to be zero, making it viable for a distributor to integrate forward with end users and consumers at scale. And all of this because of the ease and the convenience and the immediacy of things that happen online. So suppliers can now be aggregated at scale, leaving consumers or users as a first-order priority. And by extension, this means that the most important factor determining success is the user experience. In other words, now we are looking at trying to appeal directly to a particular potential customer instead of trying to do things on a much more macro level. We're looking micro. We're looking to the particular person that we're trying to reach, and we're trying to appeal to that person directly. Now, we should make a distinction between customers and consumers. A customer buys a product. A consumer uses a product. Seems like they should be the same person, and in many cases that is true. However, not always. How many times have you bought something as a gift for somebody else? If you're a business owner, how many times have you bought a product or a service in order for your employees to be able to use that product or service to help them to be able to produce and to help them to do their jobs? So sometimes the customer and the consumer is the same person, but not always. So you have to think about that in terms of the way that you craft your messages and who it is that you're appealing to. Because ultimately, you're trying to appeal to the person that is going to buy the product. But you also have to tout the benefits of the product or service for those that would use it, and that be a compelling enough argument for whoever has the money to go and buy it. Now, what is advertising? Ken Auletta in Frenemies states that in a non-state-run economy, advertising is the bridge between seller and buyer. In other words, when the government is not compelling people to buy certain things, or the government is not buying itself for the sake of people, you have to appeal to those that actually would make use of your product or service. So advertising is that means to make the buyer, the potential buyer, aware of the thing that you have and to convince them to buy your product or service. Let's talk about direct response advertising versus branding advertising. Direct response advertising tries to close a sale or a transaction in real time. The best example of this would be, you're walking through like a street fair or something, and you go to a booth. That booth has products available, and the person tries to convince you to buy the stuff that he or she has available. That is direct response advertising. Branding advertising, on the other hand, invests in building brand equity and attempts to establish a brand's value proposition in consumers' minds. So there's a little more time investment that happens here more often than not, because you're trying to not just sell a product or service. You're trying to sell basically this idea that the brand itself is worth something. Think about the demand that people have for certain brands of products or services. Just about everyone knows Nike shoes, for example, and it's considered to be one of the upper echelons of different footwear products that is available. That branding of Nike has a certain reputation that is of an appeal to certain types of shoe buyers, and that's because of the branding and the reputation that Nike has tried to establish over the past several decades. Direct response advertising, the return on it will often occur immediately with a click and a sale. The return on branding advertising, however, will take longer, sometimes years, to pay off. So again, it's that idea of trying to make that quick buck to sell something that you have, immediately get rid of it, versus creating this image in the mind of the consumer that your particular brand is directly associated with usefulness and quality for the particular thing that you're selling. Both types of advertising can develop demand for goods and services, and consumer demand will drive the economy. It all depends on what the particular end game is. If you are just trying to sell a one-off item, branding advertising may not be as important. But if you're trying to create repeat customers, or create some sort of a trend, then branding is going to become more and more important. Media salespeople must understand the complexities and technologies that create and distribute advertising in order to effectively sell it. So there's going to be cases where direct response is going to be much more effective and much more beneficial. And there's times where branding is going to be much more beneficial. And media salespeople are going to need to know the distinctions and when one is better than the other. All right, taking a look at the media now. The vast majority of media businesses are dependent in full or in part on advertising. And advertising as an integral part of a larger marketing system is codependent on the media. So there's a symbiotic relationship that happens there between the media and various businesses that do the advertising. There's that interdependency that happens there. The reason marketers and advertisers are dependent on the media is because the media are pervasive and popular with consumers, and the media are consumers linked to the global village. The media have the mouthpiece. They reach numerous people through their audiences, and they have that platform in order to be able to mass communicate a message to those people, no matter what level we're talking about. If you're talking about mass audiences through things like broadcast television, or even more smaller audiences through various niche channels or various internet sites or what have you. People actually seek out these various media platforms in order to consume information and entertainment and that sort of thing. And therefore, businesses want to be able to take advantage of those audiences that are available. People love their media and depend on their media. Because of this affection and dependency, the media are actually the most powerful businesses in the country. They have a lot of influence. Top-rated radio and television stations in major markets often have profit margins of 40% or greater. The reason for these profit margins is because in an advertising-supported medium, the cost of adding an additional ad has no or extremely low incremental costs involved. This is that idea of economies of scale. Because, again, we're talking about this idea that when you have the equipment to be able to create the advertising, when you have the wherewithal to be able to produce these messages, it doesn't really take that much more investment to create more of a thing in order to be able to sell that particular thing. You know, time notwithstanding, when it comes to traditional television and radio, you may only have so much inventory, but to actually produce different types of content, when you have the people, when you have the equipment and the wherewithal to be able to do that, initial startup costs, significant, but as you go on and on and on, you just use those same tools that you have available to be able to meet the needs of the advertisers that come along. And with that, that's going to do it for Chapter 1. Go ahead and complete your notes and start looking at the study questions. Don't forget to check out the survey on Blackboard. Fill that survey out before we get together for our class meeting. That gives me a chance to take a look at the things that you're processing, what interests you, what sort of questions or issues or disagreements that you may have. It'll help to fuel our discussion when we get together. I should say. And when we do get together, we'll talk and we'll discuss.